The security camera footage didn't lie. On a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in downtown Charleston, Margaret Thornton, wife of Governor Richard Thornton, drove her Mercedes SUV into a handicapped parking space outside Miller's Grocery. When 72-year-old Korean War veteran James Sullivan politely pointed out that she was parked illegally and blocking the ramp he needed for his wheelchair, everything changed. What happened next shocked the entire community. Margaret didn't just ignore him. She didn't simply apologize and move her vehicle. Instead, she stepped out of her car, designer sunglasses perched on her head, and unleashed a tirade of insults that would make a sailor blush. When Mr. Sullivan calmly repeated his request, she shoved him hard, sending the elderly veteran tumbling backward onto the hot pavement. The fall broke his hip and fractured his wrist. 3 witnesses rushed to help as Margaret drove away without a second glance. Mr. Sullivan had served his country with distinction, earning a Purple Heart and Bronze Star. He'd been a beloved Little League coach for 30 years, a volunteer at the VA hospital, and a grandfather to 7. The community knew him as a gentle soul who always had a kind word and a piece of candy for neighborhood children. Within hours, the surveillance video went viral. Social media exploded with outrage. The local news ran the story on repeat. Protesters gathered outside the governor's mansion demanding justice. Editorial boards across the state condemned the incident. Even national news outlets picked up the story. Governor's wife assaults disabled veteran over parking space. The pressure became unbearable. The governor's office released a brief statement expressing concern for all involved, but stopped short of an apology. Margaret Thornton remained silent, retreating behind the mansion's iron gates. 2 weeks later, the district attorney filed charges: assault and battery on an elderly person, leaving the scene of an injury, and reckless endangerment. The trial date was set. Charleston hadn't been this divided since the civil rights era. Some defended Margaret, claiming the video was taken out of context or that Mr. Sullivan had provoked her. But most people, across all political lines, demanded accountability. The trial was scheduled for a Monday morning in Judge Harold Mitchell's courtroom. Veterans groups promised to fill every seat. The media secured their positions outside. The entire city held its breath. But a revelation was brewing, one that no one could have anticipated. A revelation that would test the very foundations of justice, family loyalty, and political power. But an unexpected revelation was about to change everything in the courtroom. Judge Harold Mitchell entered courtroom 3A at precisely 9 a.m. At 68 years old, with 35 years on the bench, he'd seen every type of defendant imaginable. But this case was different. The eyes of an entire state were watching. The courtroom was packed beyond capacity. Veterans in uniform sat in silent solidarity in the first 3 rows, their medals gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Mr. Sullivan sat in the front row in his wheelchair, his arms still in a cast, supported by his daughter. Press credentials filled the back rows. Armed bailiffs stood at every entrance. The atmosphere was electric with tension. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Harold Mitchell," the bailiff announced. Judge Mitchell took his seat, his weathered face impassive. He'd deliberately chosen not to recuse himself despite the political pressure. Justice, he believed, should be blind to power and privilege. "Be seated," he said calmly. "We are here in the matter of the state versus Margaret and Thornton. Will the defendant please rise?" The side door opened. Margaret Thornton entered the courtroom as if she were walking into a country club luncheon. Her designer suit was immaculate, her jewelry expensive and tasteful, her hair styled to perfection. But it was her expression that caught everyone's attention, a subtle smirk of entitlement, the look of someone who'd never faced real consequences. She took her place beside her attorney, a high-priced lawyer from a prestigious firm, and remained standing. "Mrs. Thornton, you are charged with assault and battery on an elderly person, leaving the scene of an injury, and reckless endangerment. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," she said coolly, her voice carrying a hint of boredom, as if this were merely an inconvenience. The trial proceeded with opening statements. The prosecution laid out the facts methodically. The video evidence, the medical reports, witness testimony. The evidence was overwhelming. When Mr. Sullivan was called to testify, a hush fell over the courtroom. His daughter wheeled him to the witness stand. He raised his good hand to be sworn in, his voice steady despite his age and injuries. "Mr. Sullivan, can you describe what happened on August 15th? The prosecutor asked gently. "I was trying to access the store," he began, his voice clear. "I noticed a vehicle blocking the wheelchair ramp. I approached the driver, Mrs. Thornton, and politely asked if she might move her car. I even said, 'Please,' and explained about my wheelchair. What happened next? She began yelling at me, called me names I won't repeat in this courtroom, told me I was a nobody who should know better than to tell her what to do." His voice wavered slightly. "I've faced enemy fire in Korea. I've buried friends. But I've never felt so small as I did in that moment. And then she pushed me. I fell. I remember the pain and the heat of the pavement. When I looked up, she was getting in her car. She looked right at me lying there, and she drove away." A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom. Several veterans wiped their eyes. Judge Mitchell leaned forward. "Thank you for your service and your testimony, Mr. Sullivan." When Margaret took the stand in her own defense, her demeanor remained unchanged. She claimed Mr. Sullivan had been aggressive and that she merely gestured when he fell. She suggested he might have tripped. She implied that the video didn't show the full context. "Mrs. Thornton," Judge Mitchell interrupted, his tone sharpening, "we've all seen the video. Multiple times. Are you suggesting the security camera fabricated what we witnessed?" "I'm suggesting, Your Honor, that things aren't always as they appear. I'm the wife of the governor. I have responsibilities, obligations. I was late for an important meeting. And that justifies assaulting a disabled veteran?" "I didn't assault anyone. He fell. Perhaps if he were more careful." "Enough." Judge Mitchell's voice cut through the courtroom like a blade. "I have shown considerable patience, Mrs. Thornton, but I will not allow you to victim blame in my courtroom." Margaret's lawyer whispered urgently to her, but she waved him away dismissively. "Your Honor, with all due respect, I think we all know this is politically motivated. My husband is governor. People want to make an example of me. In any other circumstance—" "In any other circumstance," Judge Mitchell said, his voice rising, "you would still be guilty of assault. The law applies equally to everyone, Mrs. Thornton. Or have you forgotten that basic principle?" For the first time, a flicker of uncertainty crossed Margaret's face. But it was quickly replaced by defiance. The closing arguments concluded. Judge Mitchell declared a brief recess before sentencing. The courtroom buzzed with speculation. Most expected a slap on the wrist, community service, a fine, perhaps probation. After all, she was the governor's wife. But as people filtered back into the courtroom for sentencing, something unexpected happened. And then someone stood up in the back of the courtroom. The figure rose slowly from the last row, where he'd been sitting unnoticed throughout the entire trial. He wore a simple dark suit, no entourage, no security detail. His face was drawn, aged beyond his years in just these few weeks. It was Governor Richard Thornton. A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Cameras clicked frantically. The governor had told the press he couldn't attend due to pressing state business. Everyone assumed he was avoiding the spectacle. But he'd been there all along, watching everything. "Your Honor," his voice carried across the silent courtroom, "may I approach?" Judge Mitchell, showing his first sign of surprise, nodded slowly. "Governor Thornton, I wasn't aware you were present. I didn't want to be a distraction." The governor walked down the center aisle, each step measured. Margaret turned in her seat, her confident facade finally cracking. "Your Honor, I have something I need to say. Something the people of this state need to hear." "Proceed, Governor." Richard Thornton turned to face the courtroom, then looked directly at his wife. His voice shook slightly. 28 years ago, I married Margaret. I thought I knew her. Perhaps I did once. He paused, struggling with emotion. I've spent the past 3 weeks trying to understand how we got here. How the woman I married could push an elderly veteran to the ground and drive away. "Richard," Margaret started, but he held up his hand. "No. You've had your say. Now it's my turn." He turned back to Judge Mitchell. "Your Honor, I've spent my career in public service. My father was a police officer. My grandfather was a judge. They taught me that justice isn't just a word, it's a sacred trust. They taught me that character is defined not by what we do when people are watching, but by what we do when we think no one is looking." He paused, his voice growing stronger. "I've been asked by my advisers, my party, even members of my own family to use my influence, to make calls, to suggest that perhaps this matter could be handled quietly, with minimal consequences." His jaw tightened. "I won't do it." The courtroom was absolutely silent. Even the reporters stopped typing. "Mr. Sullivan is a hero. He fought for this country when I was just a boy. He served with honor. He's spent his life giving back to his community. And my wife," his voice broke, "my wife treated him like he was nothing. Like his service, his dignity, his very humanity meant nothing compared to her convenience." Margaret's lawyer stood. "Your Honor, I object to." "Sit down," the governor said sharply. The lawyer sat. Richard turned to his wife. "Margaret, I love you. I will always love you. But I will not use my position to shield you from the consequences of your actions. That would be a betrayal of everything I believe in, everything my father and grandfather stood for." Tears streamed down Margaret's face now, her composure completely shattered. The governor faced Judge Mitchell again. "Your Honor, I'm here to ask you to apply the law as written, without consideration for who we are or what positions we hold. Mr. Sullivan deserves justice. The people of this state deserve to know that no one, not even the governor's wife, is above the law." He took a deep breath. "And I'm here to tell you that whatever sentence you impose, I will support it fully. I will not pardon her. I will not commute her sentence. I will not use executive power to interfere with justice." The courtroom erupted. Reporters rushed for doors. Veterans stood and saluted. Judge Mitchell gavelled for order. Richard walked to where Mr. Sullivan sat. He knelt beside the wheelchair. "Sir, I cannot apologize enough for what my wife did to you. You served this country with honor. You deserved respect. You deserved better." His voice cracked. "I'm so sorry." Mr. Sullivan looked at him for a long moment, then placed his good hand on the governor's shoulder. "Thank you for your courage, Governor. That couldn't have been easy." Richard Thornton returned to his seat, visibly shaken. Margaret sat frozen, mascara running down her face, finally comprehending the gravity of what she'd done and what she'd lost. Judge Mitchell cleared his throat. Would the defendant please rise for sentencing? Margaret stood on trembling legs. Her lawyer supported her elbow. The judge's eyes swept across the courtroom, then settled on Margaret with an expression of profound disappointment. "Mrs. Thornton, I've been on this bench for 35 years. I've sentenced murderers, thieves, and every variety of criminal. But your crime is perhaps the most insidious because it stems not from desperation or circumstance, but from a profound sense of entitlement, a belief that you are somehow above the basic decency we owe our fellow human beings." He paused, letting the words sink in. You assaulted a war hero, a man who sacrificed for his country while you were born into privilege. And when he lay injured by your actions, you simply drove away. Not once in this trial have I heard genuine remorse or accountability, only excuses and deflection. Margaret's legs buckled. Her attorney caught her. This court must send a clear message. Judge Mitchell's voice resonated through the hushed courtroom with the weight of justice itself. Margaret and Thornton, you are hereby sentenced to 18 months in the county correctional facility, with no possibility of early release. Upon release, you will serve 1,000 hours of community service at the Veterans Administration Hospital, where you will assist disabled veterans, including those in wheelchairs, with their daily needs. Gasps filled the courtroom. This was far harsher than anyone expected. Additionally, you will pay full restitution for Mr. Sullivan's medical expenses, plus $50,000 in punitive damages to be donated to disabled veterans organizations. You will also complete anger management and empathy training courses. Margaret swayed, but the judge wasn't finished. I want to be clear why this sentence is what it is. This court cannot tolerate the abuse of power. We cannot accept a society where privilege grants immunity from basic human decency. Mr. Sullivan served this nation. He earned our respect. You gave him contempt. This sentence is designed not just to punish, but to educate, to force you to understand the humanity of those you dismissed so callously. Margaret's legs gave out completely. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing. Governor Thornton stood. Your Honor, may I add something? Judge Mitchell nodded. The sentencing you've imposed is just and appropriate, but I need to add my own consequences. He turned to Margaret. I filed for legal separation. Our marriage cannot continue while you serve your sentence. I need you to understand that choices have costs, not just legal ones, but personal ones. Margaret looked up at him, devastated. When you complete your sentence, if you've truly changed, if you've learned what you need to learn, perhaps we can talk. But right now, the woman who pushed Mr. Sullivan is not someone I recognize. I need to see if that woman can find her way back to the person I once knew. He walked to Mr. Sullivan again. Sir, my office will cover any expenses not addressed by the court. We'll also establish a scholarship in your name for children of disabled veterans. It's not enough, but it's a start. Mr. Sullivan wheeled forward slightly. The courtroom fell silent as everyone waited to hear from the man who'd been wronged. Your Honor, may I speak? Of course, Mr. Sullivan. The elderly veteran's voice was clear and strong. I appreciate the justice this court has delivered today. But I want to say something to Mrs. Thornton. He looked directly at her tear-stained face. Ma'am, I've lived through war. I've seen the worst of humanity. But I've also seen redemption. I've seen enemies become friends. I've seen people change. He paused. What you did hurt me, yes. Not just physically, but in my soul. To be treated as less than human, that's a wound that cuts deep. Margaret couldn't look at him. But I also know that hate only breeds more hate. So here's what I want you to know. I forgive you. Not because you've earned it, but because carrying anger would only poison me. I truly hope, that this experience changes you. That you learn to see people like me not as obstacles, but as fellow human beings with dignity and worth. His words hung in the air like a benediction. I'll be praying for you, Mrs. Thornton. I hope when you come out, you'll be better than when you went in. Several people in the courtroom openly wept. Even Judge Mitchell had to pause and clear his throat. Richard Thornton knelt beside Mr. Sullivan's wheelchair. Sir, your grace humbles me. Just teach your constituents to be better, Governor. That's how you honor what happened here today. The bailiffs approached Margaret. As they prepared to take her into custody, Richard stepped forward one last time. He took her hands. "Margaret, I meant what I said. I love you. But love sometimes means letting people face the consequences they need to face. Use this time. Really use it. Find out who you are without the title, without the privilege. Find your humanity again." "Richard, I'm so sorry," she whispered, her voice broken. "I'm so sorry. Tell that to Mr. Sullivan. Tell that to yourself. And then show it through your actions." As Margaret was led away, the courtroom remained standing. The veterans saluted. Judge Mitchell descended from the bench and personally shook Mr. Sullivan's hand. Outside, reporters clamored for statements. Governor Thornton addressed them briefly. Today, justice was served. Not political justice, not convenient justice, but real justice. My wife committed a crime. She's being held accountable. That's how our system is supposed to work. I'm proud of Judge Mitchell's courage. I'm humbled by Mr. Sullivan's grace. And I'm hopeful that my wife will emerge from this a better person. He paused, looking directly into the cameras. Let this be a lesson to all of us in positions of power. We are not above the law. We are not above basic human decency. And if we forget that, there are good people like Judge Mitchell and Mr. Sullivan who will remind us. Epilogue. 18 months later. The morning sun filtered through the windows of the VA hospital's rehabilitation wing. Margaret Thornton, no longer using her married name in this space, pushed a wheelchair down the corridor. In it sat a young veteran, barely 25, who'd lost both legs in Afghanistan. "Thanks, Mrs. T," he said as she positioned him beside the physical therapy equipment. "It's my honor, Marcus," she said quietly. She'd been out of prison for 3 months, and true to Judge Mitchell's order, she reported to the VA hospital every day for her community service. But something had shifted. What began as punishment had become something else, something resembling purpose. In prison, Margaret had been stripped of everything that defined her: the title, the mansion, the privilege. She'd been just another inmate, anonymous and equal. The experience had shattered her, but in breaking her, it had also rebuilt something more authentic. She'd started therapy. Real therapy, not just court-mandated sessions. She'd confronted the entitled mindset that had driven her actions. She'd read Mr. Sullivan's military records and the stories of countless other veterans. She'd wept for what she'd done. Now, working alongside the very people she'd once dismissed, she was learning what service really meant. Mr. Sullivan wheeled into the corridor. He came twice a week for physical therapy on his hip, which had healed but still caused pain. "Good morning, Mr. Sullivan," Margaret said, her voice respectful. "Morning, Margaret," he replied. They'd reached an understanding over the past months, not quite friendship, but something like mutual respect. "How's the hip today?" "Ornery as ever. But I'm still standing. Well, sitting." He smiled gently. "How are you doing?" "Better. Taking it one day at a time." She paused. "I wanted to thank you again for what you said in court. I didn't deserve your forgiveness, but it gave me something to live up to." "We all need something to live up to," Mr. Sullivan said. "The question is whether we try." That afternoon, as Margaret finished her shift, she noticed a familiar figure in the hospital lobby. Richard stood by the windows, hands in his pockets, watching her approach. They'd met a few times since her release, carefully, tentatively, like strangers learning each other again. "Hi," she said softly. "Hi. Thought I'd see if you wanted coffee. There's a place down the street." They walked in silence for a while, the weight of everything unsaid hanging between them. "I've been watching you," Richard finally said. "Not just today. I've checked in with the hospital administration. They say you've been exceptional, that you've gone beyond what was required. I owed more than what was required." "I know. He stopped walking and turned to her. "I'm not saying we can just pick up where we left off. You hurt someone I respect deeply. You embarrassed everything I stand for. But I also see you trying. Really trying. Not performing for cameras or playing a role. Actually changing." Tears welled in Margaret's eyes. "I'm not the person I was, Richard. I can't be. That person was hollow and cruel. I'm trying to build something real. I can see that." They found a bench and sat together, two people who'd lost almost everything trying to find their way back to something true. "The governor's race is coming up," Richard said. "I'm not running again. I think it's time for new blood, new perspectives. I've been thinking about what comes next." "What do you want to do?" "Actually serve. Not from a mansion or an office, but with my hands. I've been talking to the VA about starting a program, governors and former officials working directly with veterans, breaking down the walls between power and the people we're supposed to serve." Margaret looked at him, seeing the man she'd married decades ago, the idealist who believed in service. "That sounds like you," she said. "The real you. I learned it from watching you these past months. And from Mr. Sullivan. Real change happens person to person, not policy to policy." Months turned into a year. Margaret completed her community service hours but continued volunteering. Richard launched his Veterans Initiative. Slowly, carefully, they rebuilt their relationship, not as governor and first lady, but as two flawed people trying to be better. Mr. Sullivan's scholarship had sent 5 children of disabled veterans to college. Margaret had personally mentored 2 of them. On the 2nd anniversary of the incident, a small ceremony was held at the VA hospital. A plaque was unveiled, the James Sullivan Center for Veteran Services, where dignity meets service. Mr. Sullivan sat in his wheelchair, surrounded by family and fellow veterans. Margaret stood to the side, not seeking attention, just bearing witness. Richard spoke to the assembled crowd. 2 years ago, an injustice occurred. One man was wronged. But from that wrong, something unexpected grew. Not because the wrong was acceptable, but because people chose redemption over resentment, justice over revenge, change over comfort. He looked at Margaret, then at Mr. Sullivan. Judge Mitchell taught us that power doesn't grant immunity. Mr. Sullivan taught us that grace can transform even the hardest hearts. And Margaret taught us that it's never too late to become who we should have been all along. As the ceremony concluded, Margaret approached Mr. Sullivan one final time. "Mr. Sullivan, I know I've said this before, but I need to say it again. I'm sorry. Not the sorry of someone trying to escape consequences, but the sorry of someone who finally understands what she destroyed, and how precious it was." Mr. Sullivan looked up at her, his weathered face kind. "I know, Margaret. I can see it in how you live now. That's the apology that matters, the one you live every day. I'll never stop living it. That's how we change the world, one choice at a time, one person at a time." As the sun set over the hospital, casting long shadows across the parking lot where it had all begun, 3 people stood together. A veteran who'd chosen forgiveness, a woman who'd chosen transformation, and a man who'd chosen justice over loyalty. They represented something essential, the truth that redemption is possible, but only through genuine accountability, hard work, and the courage to face what we've done. In the end, the story wasn't about the crime. It was about what came after, about a judge who wouldn't bend, a veteran who wouldn't break, a governor who wouldn't compromise his principles, and a woman who found her humanity in the last place she expected, serving those she'd once dismissed. Justice had been served. But more importantly, mercy had been earned and given. And from that alchemy of accountability and grace, something beautiful had emerged. Proof that even the most privileged can learn to serve, even the most entitled can learn humility, and even the deepest wrongs can lead to profound transformation. The law had done its work. But it was love, Tough love, honest love, sacrificial love, that had redeemed them all.